Welcome to Night Club, guys. It's your host, the Night Wrencher. I've been getting a ton of comments, people asking me how to weld, what the secret is to welding flux core vertically. So I went ahead and put this demonstration together for you guys. I tried filming this at nighttime, but I just couldn't get any good camera angles, and I ended up welding this real quick just so you guys can see. This is just an example. It's not anything perfect. It's not anything permanent. It's just two pieces of scrap metal, and I just put them together like this. This is what people tend to call either a fillet weld. I guess you could also call this a lap weld. If you were welding it like this, it would count as a lap weld, but I welded it like this, so it is a vertical weld. You can tell I do have enough penetration. You can see inside there that all the molten metal that turned blue, you have one there, and then you have one on the inside corner over here. This one over here is just a straight vertical butt weld. So you got the two pieces of steel. I think it's 5/8, 16 gauge 5/8. You can see that I've got penetration all the way through on this side and a little bit on that side. I was just playing with different versions, different techniques to just basically try it out and tell you which one I prefer. The main thing about vertical welding, and specifically with flux core, is that flux core is very difficult to get going because flux core is a harder wire, as in it doesn't flow nearly as easily as regular MIG wire does because it does have the flux material in it. So the most important part when beginning your weld, number one, is to get it flowing. So you want to go ahead and get as close as you can, get that thing flowing, and the second thing would be to build it up. And the reason for that is you want to build it up on the bottom because you're fighting gravity. Gravity is going to be pulling your molten material down. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to go ahead and strike your arc on the metal, and then you're going to want to go left and right. So you start on one, then you bind it to the next one, then you bind it back, then you bind it to the next one. Because of gravity, the spatter does end up falling right here to the bottom, and it actually becomes pretty tough to get off. The two big differences between the standard fillet weld and the butt weld is how you're going to go ahead and control your gun. On the fillet weld, my preferred process is actually to do a left and right pattern. The easiest way that I can tell you guys to go ahead and start your weld, you're going to want to start at the bottom, obviously, because gravity comes down. If you start at the top, you're going to get a lot of porosity, you're going to get waves going over your weld, and it's not going to bind very well. So you always want to start at the bottom when you're welding vertically. So you're going to start off at one of the materials, then you're going to move your gun to the other material, and then once that starts flowing, you're going to move it back. It'll basically create a nice little molten ball, and then after that, you just keep going left and right, left and right, left and right. And every time you move left and right, you're going to create one of these little waves. That's what creates the wave pattern on the weld. While I was doing this one specifically, I tried it in two different ways. I tried it stringer, which is basically just straight up, and then halfway up, I went left and right. Looking at this, the main difference that you guys can see is that when I was doing the stringer weld, it was a much thinner weld, much less consistent. When I went left and right, I could control the gun and decide how wide to make my puddle, and obviously I can make a better, more stronger weld. So that's a big reason why when I'm welding fillet welds vertically, I tend to go into the left and right motion. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but what happens when you're trying to weld something like this? So it's almost the same situation except for one thing. Instead of two flat surfaces touching each other, you are fighting with a material that has an opening right here in the front. So what happens is, because it has an opening, it's actually a weaker metal and it'll tend to fall in much easier than this would. Really, it's a little bit more difficult to maintain your heat without actually melting and burning the edge off and causing you to create holes. So the best method for welding something like this is that you're actually going to want to start on the stronger material first. Not necessarily the thicker material, but the stronger material, aka the material that has the most support. In this case right here, it'll be this nice and flat material. So you're going to go ahead and strike your arc right here. Once you get this thing flowing, you're going to touch this, and then you're going to bring it back almost instantly. That way you can have the two metals bonded, and then you're just going to keep doing that. You're going to touch it, go back, touch it, go back. It's not necessarily the same as doing like the S-bend that we did up here. It's more like this. So you want to spend a little bit more time on the stronger material, dip into the weaker material, then you're going to want to go back and spend a little bit more. And what you're doing is you're building up your weld here, then binding it to the weaker material, building it up over here, and then binding it back into the material. So if you're looking at it like kind of like this, and these are the two materials, this is the stronger material, and then this is kind of like the weaker material. So you don't want to be in a point where you're doing this, and when you're doing this, you start making a hole right here. The second process is a little bit more difficult because unlike the fillet weld over here, you don't really have any kind of support. So this all really depends a lot on hand control and your gun settings. You're not going to want to go too hot because you don't want to poke in, and you also don't want to go too slow because you're going to start building up material. So what will happen is, because it's going vertical, you're going to start your weld right in the middle or on one of the materials, whatever is easier for you, and then you're going to shoot straight up. You're going to shoot straight up like this. So if you go too slow, because of gravity, it's going to sag. It's going to sag regardless, and it's going to create all the ripples facing down, just like it did over here. If you hold it for a little bit more than a second, you're going to get a nice big ball right here of basically weld material, and it's just going to ruin your entire weld. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to build up your ball right here at the bottom, just like you did on the last one, and then you're just going to start pulling it up slowly. And if you start noticing that it's balling up a lot, or if you're overheating the material, climb a little bit further up and then let it build up, and then continue on with your stream. So the goal here is really to just finish up the weld as fast as you can, while also adding enough metal and enough material for it to have a pretty strong weld. As you guys can tell here, right here, I actually did the left and right motion, so I actually going left and right here, but I was getting too much buildup right here. I was leaving the gun in here way too long, and on this one I just went straight across. It came out more uniform than this one did. You guys can tell right here in the back that even though I was going faster and I was going straight up, I still put significant amount of heat right here versus going left and right here, and I hardly even put any kind of heat toward here in the back. You can see a little bit of yellowing, but not much. But over here you can obviously tell that I did more than enough heat. So I'm going to go ahead and put up the camera so I can show you exactly what I did. I'm not wearing any of my protective gear. Unfortunately, I do have some like worker gloves. These aren't going to do anything in terms of protection. Maybe they'll protect me against the heat a little bit, but hardly anything. When you guys are welding, it's very important that you guys wear your protection, because those burns are pretty nasty. They are created using UV rays. A lot of people got mad at me last video because, oh, you didn't warn people that those rays can cause cancer and blah, blah, blah. I know they cause cancer. Most people should know that they cause cancer. I don't like telling people obvious things, but I will say it this time because I'm actually not wearing it. Just because I'm not wearing it doesn't mean that you shouldn't wear it either. I just forgot it at work, so I'm sorry about that. Usually I'm pretty careful about wearing my stuff. So let's go ahead and put the camera up and I'll show you what I'm doing. Visibility is actually key when welding, but even more so when you're actually welding vertical. You need to see exactly what you're doing and exactly where you're pointing, because it will completely determine the shape of your weld. So basically, when you're setting up your posture, you want to get pretty much like this close. Let's assume my finger is a gun. You pretty much want to get this close. You're going to want to follow along with your gun and see everything the gun is doing, see where the wire is hitting, and make sure that each motion that you do is deliberate. Another big issue with us beginners is that we don't know how to set up our machines. So we get a lot of interruptions, and interruptions when you're welding vertically are actually very destructive. What will happen is, because flux core takes a while for it to flow out, and when I say takes a while, it takes a split second, but when you're welding, a split second can mean the difference between a straight weld and a weld that has a lot of balls in it. So what you're going to want to do is you want to make sure that you have zero interruptions from start to finish. You want to make sure your wire tension's good, your wire speed is good, and your heat range. If anything, practice on another material first and then apply the same settings to the material that you're welding here. The thickness, as long as you're welding the same thicknesses, the settings should translate almost identical. The only thing that'll change is your hand motion. If you're not welding holes on a similar material laying down, you shouldn't be welding holes on a material standing up if it's the same general size. I gotta clean out my helmet because I can't see anything right now. Flux core creates a lot of smoke, and so the inner linings of my helmet actually get pretty smoky. You want to make sure you want to keep this all nice and clean, so your welds can come out better. The better you can see, the better your welds are going to get. easy does it. We're going to look at this weld up close in a second, okay? Next one. Alright, let's take a look at these welds. Okay, starting off with the lap weld or the fillet weld. You guys can see it's a nice wide weld. It did go all the way up. But you guys are going to notice that if I hit it with my slag hammer, all the slag on top kind of gets out of the way. And it actually evens out the weld a little bit because what you're seeing over the slag is not necessarily the quality of the weld. That could just be a pileup of slag and not necessarily a pileup of welding material. So I just hit it right now and I don't see any kind of porosity or anything like that. And it's just a normal looking weld. I could actually hit it with the brush so I can get a cleaner visual on it. But as you guys can see, it worked just fine. I did end up going side to side and then just gently dragged it up. This one right here has a similar story, but this one, as you guys could tell, I just dragged it straight up without moving the gun too much. So we're gonna go ahead and hit it with the slag hammer. So as you guys can see right here, it's got a little bit of a bump to it, but not terrible. It's not bad. It's pretty flat and it's nice and straight. No problems right there. I started it off just doing it left and right just to tie in both materials together, and I just dragged it straight up. They're not the most beautiful welds, but I can guarantee that they are strong welds. Anybody welding like this, especially as a beginner, is probably doing pretty good with the stuff that they gotta do. Hopefully you guys find this video helpful. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher out.